today's episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast, we are going to discuss the progressive stages, we could say, of some elements of practice and integration. So when we are first working with more advanced meditation, we're being introduced to deeper and deeper states of being, deeper and deeper qualities of mind, more and more refined frequencies, in the sense that they are more difficult to tune the awareness to and then to resonate with fully and sustain. Because they're more refined, it requires simplicity of environment. So this, in an obvious standpoint, would be the 4 basic postures that you might hear about, say, in a Buddhistic type of framework of meditation that you do lying down, seated, standing, and walking. Okay? Each of these precludes more complex patterns at play to sustain the basics of that function. Right? Lying down requires a less developed habit of posture and balance and counterbalance than sitting does. Sitting requires less habits of posture, musculature, engagement, balancing, counterbalancing, all that stuff, than standing. And once again, standing is less complex than walking around or moving. So when we are working with integrating the stillness-based practices into walking practices or moving practices, it's good to have a sliding scale of refinement that we can navigate so that we can work with something that is easier to tap into when the complexity of the activity is greater. So, in this case, if you are engaging in seated practice, you might be able to work through your current development with, say, the Akashic paradox, this spaciousness, expansiveness, infinity in and out. This could be worked through, say, in a seated practice along with more non-dual light type of experience. Now, many people will find that when they try to bring this from the seated experience into the standing experience, that the ability to release into that Akashic state and those more refined light relationships, we could say, that's more difficult, right? Because you're standing. So the habitual activations of postural formation and balance and counterbalance, all of this stuff, it needs to play a role. So in order to bridge that gap takes time. We really have to be very, very stable within our recognition of that energy and ideally our identity as that energy, right? In the seated posture, then we can start to bring it into standing. Now, also, the practice of standing over time, you'll develop an alignment that requires less and less counterbalancing because all of these habits that we use to stand, all of this doingness, there's a fear, of course, of falling and all of these things, all of that, we release all of that through the standing practice, and that centers us, right? And aligns us in such a way that we can stand with less and less and less habitual fabrications. As we develop this from a bodily standpoint more and more, as those releases occur, then it is easier to bridge the gap from the seated practice to the standing practice. Now, I'm not going to discuss too much of lying down, mainly because the vast majority of people who do lying down practices fall asleep. So at least when you're seated, there's enough of your vestibular system that's still, active, that when you start to fall asleep, you wake yourself up. And it is important that we do not lose consciousness, right? That's that's an important thing, because if we start to fall asleep during practice, we will build a habit that practice means fall asleep. And part of what we want to do is go as deep as possible while maintaining a type of awareness, right? So, seated practice to standing, you really build the relationship and resonance, we could say, with the refined qualities that you're working with in the seated practice. And then, let's say before you're able to bridge the gap, standing, you might not be able quite yet to reach into the Akasha and more non-dualistic light type phases and refinements and realities. And so then in the standing practice, you would work with, say, astral energy, right? You would work with a coarser layer of energy that doesn't require as deep a and still an environmental experience. We include the body in the environment, right? I don't know why I keep doing quotations today, but I guess we'll we'll jump on it. We'll roll with it. So the more refined the frequency, the more pristine the conditions need to be. Okay? And this is why we might go into retreat in very still settings, very pristine settings, out in nature amongst the natural rhythms, so that we can maximize the stillness, the peace that we can find. And when the environment is very pristine, this can allow us to start to uncover more and more parts of ourselves that are not of that pristine nature. So this is where you get long rituals that you might build up over the course of a few months or longer, that culminate in the experience of the retreat, or that you engage in the ritual during the retreat and then continue the retreat while you're working through the culmination of that ritual. Some frequencies require different, not necessarily require, but can be aided. Our ability to touch into these types of refinement can be aided through things like diet, etc. And that's why different practices sometimes have specific diets that help with bringing the coarser aspects of the body, the emotions, the mind into resonance with particular refinements of frequency. So we want to be aware of this and acknowledge that posture and positioning is environmental. These are environmental. Now, once you touch into a frequency, you resonate with it, and you can really stabilize the experience with that. Then, from that point, you can increase the complexity. Now, the complexity, of course, of the environment that you are able to resonate with that frequency in. Now, that resonance of frequency, that environment, simplistically, we could use lying down, seated, standing, walking as basic increases of complexity. So, because we might not yet have bridged the gap, say, from seated to standing, our standing practice might be astral, okay? While the seated practice might be Akashic and non-dualistic light. Now, there's often a lot of, I don't know if it's confusion, because it's usually just under the radar, but we could say lack of acknowledgement about where we are in our actual development. Of course, we all like to think we are more developed than we are, because that facilitates the foundation of a nice feel good about oneself ego. So we want to acknowledge honestly where we are. And it's very easy to, from the, say, standing type of postures and slightly more complex postures, think that we are blasting out non-dualistic types of light and frequency, when in reality it is astral light. And this needs to be differentiated so that when you're working with light, you are aware of what kind of light. And most of the light type work that people do is astral. And you know this because it is not devoid of time and space. It is not on the other side of the Akashic bridge, right? And if someone's going, okay, like feel my light, you feel my light, that's usually their resistance to the light that they're emitting. And the perception is a reflection of the continuation of adherence to time and space, to the blockages, to the perceptual blockages of time and space, these particular types of tensions. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with working astral light or any of the lower density astral energies, but just be honest, right? And always, I think it's a very valuable tool to, in terms of like a view, to never impose absolutes onto what it is that you're doing. Who cares? Just practice, right? Just engage with the practice and the full scope of your capabilities in that moment, right? And this then would take us, seated practice would be Akashic, non-dual types of light. Standing practice might be higher frequency astral light into lower density astral energies. And then the moving practices, right, might be ones that you engage with lower density astral energies and vital types of energy. The vital energy being much easier to work because it's much coarser, so it's much easier to sustain a resonance with that energy in more complex activities. Okay? Most people can feel vital energy literally within a few minutes if the conditions are right. Once that perception's there, then you build resonance with it, right? Through the mind, through the emotions, through the body, and you start to get a feel for how this vital energy works. And, you know, within, if you focus on it, focus on the vital energy in seated practice, build it in standing practice, build that resonance, then you can bring it into walking relatively quickly. The more refined the frequency, the more the depth of work in the seated practice usually has to take place before it can be brought into standing, before it can be brought into walking. Okay, and we're just using, lying, seated, standing, walking as a simplistic framework right now because it's useful, right? And anyone who's done the practice will recognize these barriers of complexity of posture, of complexity of environment, and the ability to resonate with more refined frequency. Okay, so because we have in Hermetic Alchemy this sliding scale of vital energy, everything in the nature of vital energy, right through vital light, into astral energy, through the rainbow of astral energies, right through into astral light, and then we cross this Akashic bridge, and this can be done in like choicefully. This allows us the opportunity to be in resonance with energy instead of with form specifically, and work with energy in different layers of complexity, work with energy in different environments of greater and lesser complexity. Okay, why so important to work with energy? Well, it is not adhering to, or it is what specific form is made of, right? So because of that, it allows for a through flow, so that the attention that we give it is not locked into formations of mind pattern, formations of emotional pattern, formations of physical pattern. The ability for that energy to be permeable, right, is a wonderful tool when it comes to accelerating your ability to bridge that that Akashic paradox and start to work in that non-dualistic type of framework until you reach a point where the light that is that you're connecting with, or more so recognizing, is that clear light that is how can we put it, it's tricky, non-expressive, non-felt, it's something that you come to through the dissolution of that which impinges it, right? In the presence of that which impinges it, you have more of a bright, a feeling of powerful light, right? Powerful, like bright white light. So clear light is the absence of that, the resistances which usually invigorate the brightness, we might say. Anyway, this is getting a little more advanced now. We want to keep this to the seated, standing, walking. Akashic is, to the best of our abilities, non-dualistic light. The standing to the astral fluid, the moving around to the vital energy, and over time these can all bridge and move as your familiarity and your resonance with each of these grows. Okay, so perfecting the environment can pave the way to easier resonance with more refined frequencies. Once we've paved that road and we have resonance with that more refined frequency, then we can start bringing it into more complex environments. That's basically the point of this video. Okay, so how much training is required? It seems to depend on the person. A student reached out recently and mentioned he's been doing about 6 hours a day in 2-hour chunks, or more or less in the seated, standing, moving, about 2 hours of each. And that is really a wonderful foundation to keep the progression going. I have found that sort of 6-hour mark is a really good minimum for continued growth. It's really easy to stop practicing as soon as you settle into a refined frequency. Oh, okay, bang, you the obscurations, all that stuff is sort of, you've navigated your way through to a more all-encompassing present moment. And then you go, okay, I got it. And then, okay, now I'm going to go do this, that, the other thing, and immediately we leave it. So that 6 hours thing is pretty good. I found that to be a very useful framework, somewhere in that 6 to 7, as a natural rhythm when it comes to, like, whether it's one long practice, right, or whether it's being broken up. I do find the one longer practice, of course, the depth goes much more, and the energy is much stronger and supportive. You go a lot deeper, but that can be quite chaos-inducing. So breaking things up, of course, is a little easier. Now, when you're in the midst of increased chaos, then of course break that up more, and it's easier to get through That's not a good way to describe it, but it's easier to continue with your practice in smaller chunks when the chaos is higher. And then once you've settled into a more pristine resonance with the refinement that you're working with, then you can go into longer sessions, say 3 sessions of 2 hours in a day, or 2 sessions of 3 hours, or a 3, a 2, and a 1, or a 4 and a 2, whatever. It's sort of irrelevant, but you can go into longer practices once the resonance is there. And the chaos has been reorganized into alignment with that particular resonance. Okay, I think that's everything. If you're interested in training, please check out the website. There are programs in Tai Chi, in Qi Gong meditation and Hermetic Alchemy, and of course the Zen Den, which is a Q&A video reference library. So if you have questions on the training, send them in, and I get video answers back to you as soon as I'm able. All right, thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye. Practice.